deep in the subterranean galleries of Saqqara, where the sacred Apis bulls of Memphis were sealed for eternity within monolithic tombs of granite, a truth has remained deliberately beyond reach. Not the primary vaults whose colossal sarcophagi dominate the main corridors, their polished interiors reflecting light with mirror precision, and their lids seating so perfectly that no blade can penetrate the joint, but a different chamber altogether. A narrow side annex in the lower levels, long flooded by the steady advance of groundwater, contains a granite panel set into the living rock. 14 columns of finely incised hieroglyphs cover its surface. The signs are sharp, the arrangement methodical, and the determinatives employed throughout belong not to the language of offering or praise, but to the precise vocabulary of measurement, sequence, and the controlled application of vibrational force upon stone. This panel does not describe ritual. It records procedure. The granite panel remains sealed beneath the rising groundwater. Access remains forbidden. The mystery of the Serapeum has always centered on the physical impossibility of what stands in plain sight. 24 surviving sarcophagi, each a single block of Aswan granite or diorite, measure approximately 3.85 meters in length, 2.3 meters in width and height. Their total mass reaches 60 to 80 tons. The lids alone approach 25 tons. These masses were maneuvered through narrow tunnels barely wider than the boxes themselves, lowered into recessed chambers by the gradual removal of supporting sand, and brought to final rest with internal right angles, true to within fractions of a degree, and surface finishes that show no trace of the repeated pounding or dragging that conventional tools would leave. Experimental attempts to replicate the interior hollowing and final polishing of comparable granite volumes using only copper, dolerite, and quartz sand have consistently failed to match either the speed or the surface quality achieved here. The official account attributes everything to patient teams of skilled masons working over extended periods. Yet that account has never explained how such teams, operating in confined, poorly lit spaces, could achieve planar uniformity across meters of hard stone without visible subsurface disruption or cumulative error. The inscription on the sealed panel supplies the missing instrument and the method of its deployment. In 1938, during supplementary clearance work in the secondary branches of the Serapeum, an epigrapher attached to the Egyptian Antiquities Service recorded a discovery that never entered the published record. Dr. Albert J. van der Meer, working from a temporary field station, noted the brief exposure of a small side chamber that had remained dry long enough for inspection. Inside stood the granite panel, its 14 columns still legible beneath a thin film of moisture. Van der Meer's private notebook, kept separate from the duplicate official report sent to Cairo, contains a partial transcription of the opening columns, measurements of the panel's dimensions, and a sketched cross-section of a vertical apparatus with 8 radial features. He observed that the verb forms indicated repeated, sequential actions performed upon stone, and that the determinatives clustered around concepts of alignment and harmonic settlement, rather than devotion. Before a full record could be made, the seasonal rise of groundwater reclaimed the chamber. Van der Meer filed his observations, accepted reassignment to other sites, and eventually deposited his personal notebooks with a regional archive in the Netherlands. The 1938 entries remained unexamined until a digitization initiative in 2016 brought them to the attention of a small circle of researchers. A limited analysis appeared in 2018. By then, the chamber had flooded again, and no further direct inspection has been permitted. For more than a century, the standard explanation has held that the Serapeum sarcophagi were shaped and positioned using the familiar toolkit of dynastic masonry: copper chisels and tubular drills, dolerite pounders, and quartz sand abrasive applied by hand or with simple mechanical advantage. Transport across the Nile and through the desert is credited to sledges, rollers, and large labour gangs. Final placement in the recessed chambers is explained by the sand-filling method Mariette himself tested on one partially lowered example. This framework assumes that precision at the observed level was the cumulative result of prolonged manual effort by highly trained craftsmen whose methods left no anomalous traces. The framework encounters difficulty when confronted with the physical evidence. The interior surfaces of multiple sarcophagi display uniform planarity and right angles that do not degrade toward the corners or along the floor lines in the manner expected from progressive hand abrasion. Subsurface examination of comparable hard stone artifacts from other contexts has revealed microfracture patterns consistent with high-frequency vibratory energy rather than steady pressure. The confined geometry of the tunnels themselves would have made the maneuvering of 80-ton masses, by conventional rigging, extraordinarily hazardous and imprecise. The official narrative therefore rests less on positive demonstration than on the absence of any alternative account that mainstream scholarship has been willing to entertain. The panel supplies that account in the form of a technical procedure rather than a theological statement. When read as the engineering document it plainly is, the 14 columns describe the construction, tuning, and operational sequence of a portable resonant alignment apparatus used in the final stages of lid placement and sealing. The text opens by specifying the materials and dimensions of the device itself. The central element is a single block of fine-grained Aswan granite selected for its quartz vein orientation, standing 7 palms and 2 fingers in height with a basal diameter of 5 palms. 8 radial veins project from the central column at equal intervals. Each vein terminates in a precisely shaped tip, whose length is adjusted by controlled removal of material until the assembly resonates at a predetermined frequency when activated. The text employs a compound determinative, showing a vertical column containing internal wave markings, a sign distinct from those used for ritual rattles or sistra, and reserved here for an instrument whose purpose is the generation of controlled standing waves within stone. The procedure requires that the device first be tested against a reference block whose resonance signature has already been measured by strike and echo return. Once matched to the natural frequency of the sarcophagus lid, the apparatus is positioned at a calculated distance from the lid's geometric center, one vein aligned to the cardinal axis of the bull's head, as marked on the chamber floor. Activation begins with a sustained tone produced by the master operator through controlled breathing across the tuned veins. The text specifies that the fundamental frequency must correspond to 1/7 the internal length of the sarcophagus chamber, creating a standing wave node precisely at the lid's center of mass. Subsequent activations ascend through the 3rd, 5th, and 7th harmonics, each sustained for a duration defined as 12 complete cycles of priestly breath, measured against a water-filled reference vessel. During these cycles, the effective frictional resistance between the lid and its supporting surfaces diminishes through resonant entrainment. A small team using only linen ropes and wooden levers can then guide the 25-ton mass into final position without applying force sufficient to mark the polished surfaces or disturb the alignment. The final prolonged activation at the 7th harmonic allows the lid to settle under its own weight into a contact so intimate that the seam becomes invisible, and the interior volume is isolated from external atmosphere and moisture. The text closes with a caution that deviation from the prescribed sequence, or the use of an improperly tuned assembly will cause the stone to reject the imposed harmony and fracture along internal planes. Independent lines of evidence converge on the same technical reality. A damaged papyrus fragment recovered from the temple archive at Tebtunis and now held under inventory designation tept.pap.1123 contains a parallel sequence describing the preparation of an identical stone settler for use in the House of the Living Bull. The surviving columns employ overlapping terminology for harmonic ascent and breath-modulated activation, though the context was long assumed to be medical or magical. A second corroboration exists in the von Hauser private collection under catalogue number 5, HEG 1473, a small diorite model 20 centimeters in height that reproduces the central column and 8-veined configuration exactly. The base carries a single line of inscription using the same compound vibrational determinative. The model entered the collection in 1927 and has never been published. A third line of evidence surfaced in 2022 when a set of glass plate negatives from clearance work conducted in the winter of 1928 to 1929 was made available through a private European holding. One negative, provisionally catalogued EG-SER-1929-14, shows a workman standing beside a vertical granite object whose proportions match those given in the panel text, photographed before the chamber flooded. These three independent records, papyrological, artifactual, and photographic, were produced decades apart and in different institutional contexts. Their convergence on a single apparatus and procedure cannot be dismissed as coincidence or later invention. The physical principles described in the inscription receive direct validation from contemporary research into acoustic and vibratory methods for precision material interaction. Laboratory demonstrations of standing wave acoustic fields have established that objects within a properly tuned resonant volume experience a measurable reduction in effective frictional coupling to their supporting surfaces. Although most published experiments remain confined to small masses, the underlying mechanics of harmonic entrainment and node formation scale directly with increased energy input and chamber dimensions. More immediately relevant are documented results in ultrasonic-assisted machining of hard materials. Application of controlled high-frequency vibration to abrasive interfaces has been shown to reduce the mechanical force required for material removal while producing surface finishes free of the subsurface microfracture networks that characterize conventional grinding. The ancient sequence, with its emphasis on matching device output to the stone's own resonant signature and sustaining activation through precisely measured breath cycles, corresponds exactly to the conditions required for efficient resonant energy transfer. The absence of conventional tool marks on the Serapeum interiors is therefore consistent with a final stage conducted under vibrational assistance rather than steady mechanical pressure. The connection is not metaphorical. It is a repeatable physical process whose parameters the inscription records with operational specificity. The knowledge preserved on the panel has passed through 4 successive layers of suppression. In the ancient period, following the Amarna interlude and the restoration under Horemheb, temple inventories record the seizure and destruction of certain technical instruments associated with older Memphite priesthoods. The prescribed items included devices described as capable of altering the behavior of stone through resonance. The second layer belongs to late antiquity. Although the Saqqara Serapeum escaped the spectacular violence visited upon its Alexandrian counterpart in 391 CE, related technical archives in the Memphite region were systematically dispersed or burned. Fragmentary Coptic references survive to the forbidden machines of the bull priests that were sought out and broken as part of the broader campaign against pagan centres of specialised knowledge. The third layer occurred during the 19th century publication projects that defined modern Egyptology. Field drawings made during the Napoleonic expedition and subsequent French and Prussian work at Saqqara contain marginal notations describing instruments of singular mechanical aspect, recovered from debris near the Serapeum. These details were omitted or conventionalized in the final engraved plates of the Inscription de l'Égypte and its successors, preserving the appearance of technological simplicity. Correspondence from 1802 preserved in Academy archives confirms that artists were instructed to record only forms compatible with prevailing assumptions about ancient capability. The fourth layer operates in the present. Since 2010, multiple formal requests for permits to conduct controlled dewatering of the specific lower annex, or to perform non-invasive acoustic and photographic documentation of the panel area, have been denied by the Supreme Council of Antiquities. Official rationales cite structural risk and groundwater instability. Internal communications that reached unofficial channels in 2022 and 2023 record additional concern that visible technical features deviate from established typologies and could support interpretations outside accepted historical parameters. The permit is still denied. The granite panel remains sealed beneath the rising groundwater. Access remains forbidden. And then comes the part that stops the argument cold. The inscription does not present the resonant alignment apparatus as a new kingdom innovation developed for the convenience of apis burial. It states explicitly that the procedure follows the canon preserved from the masters who came before the great turning of the sky and the inundation that ended the previous house. The Serapeum was therefore not merely a cemetery. It was a secure repository in which an inherited technology of resonance engineering was applied to create sealed stone vessels whose internal harmonic condition could be maintained across extended periods and through environmental disruption. The same apparatus that allowed precise, mark-free placement of 80-ton lids was also used to tune each completed assembly to a resonant signature specific to its intended preservative function. The implication is that the precision observed throughout the complex was never an aesthetic or ritual luxury. It was the functional prerequisite for a larger system whose purpose extended beyond simple entombment. Now here's where it gets active. If the device operated through principles of standing wave formation and resonant entrainment, then the entire arrangement of precisely positioned and sealed granite masses may have constituted a large-scale harmonic structure whose behavior under specific frequencies remains unexamined. The suppression of this single inscription across 4 historical layers acquires its sharpest significance when one recognizes that the underlying physics, once recovered, can be replicated with contemporary instrumentation. The knowledge that permitted ancient engineers to settle multi-ton lids into perfect damage-free contact without conventional force could, in modern application, transform precision assembly across multiple engineering domains. That such knowledge has been kept from systematic study, and that the primary physical evidence remains inaccessible, indicates that its implications have not been lost on those who control access to the site. Those who have remained to this point now hold information that has been actively withheld from public examination for generations. The gatekeepers have maintained control, not by open refutation, but by denial of physical access, by the quiet alteration or non-publication of records, and by the classification of data that cannot be reconciled with the established narrative. If this account reaches sufficient numbers, If enough individuals recognize that the official history of ancient technological capacity is incomplete by deliberate design, the pressure to open the flooded chambers and release the full documentation will become impossible to contain. Share this with others who understand that knowledge kept in darkness serves no one. The comments below may already contain observations from those who have studied the Vandermeer transcription, or the 1929 negatives in their original forms. Your attention and your circulation of this material ensure that the record cannot be reburied as easily as the panel itself. What if the continuing rise of the groundwater is not merely the return of nature, but the final mechanism, ensuring that a technology we are not yet prepared to understand remains permanently out of reach? What if the Serapeum was never only a tomb, but a preserved fragment of an earlier engineering tradition whose full scope still lies hidden beneath other sealed sites? And what other inscriptions in other restricted locations describe comparable instruments whose recovery would force a fundamental reassessment of the entire timeline of human capability? In the next examination, we will turn to a different chamber and a different text, whose implications extend the pattern still further. If you refuse to accept the boundaries placed around our understanding of the past, subscribe now. Ring the bell so that future revelations reach you before they can be sealed away again. The truth does not disappear simply because access remains forbidden. It waits,